So thank you for joining us today at the Gnomon School of Visual Effects, Games and Animation. Today's event is part of the Los Angeles Design Festival program, which honors and celebrates LA as a global design capital. So excited to be a part of this great festival, and you can find other events happening around the area at ladesignfestival.org. So we are streaming live from Hollywood this afternoon, so huge thanks to those joining us online. Today, we'll be exploring how leading fashion designers and digital artists use 3D printing to concept and create striking garments and costumes. Our first speaker, Anouk Wipprecht, is an incredibly inspiring Dutch fashion tech designer who crafts complex wearable designs that can react to the world around them. And our second speaker, who is also one of our awesome Gnomon graduates, is Ceres Regnum, who currently works at Quantum Creation Effects, making props and costumes for films and commercials. So let's have a round of applause for today's guests, please. Thank you. So we'll kick off the event in a few moments with Anouk, who will be discussing the possibilities of interactive fashion, and we'll share her ideas on ways we can build micro-controlled garments. Super exciting, I can't wait. We'll take a short intermission after Anouk's talk ends, and then we'll kick off part two of today's event with Ceres, with a fascinating walkthrough of the pipeline involved when making props and costumes for movies, from concept through to 3D print. And we have some awesome props that we'll be setting up here during the intermission, so lots of cool stuff to see. Anouk and Ceres are happy to take questions today. As always, if you're here in the stage, please raise your hand and we'll bring the mic to you. Please be sure to wait for the mic so both Anouk and our online viewers can hear you. Online viewers, please submit questions using hashtag Gnomon on Twitter or on the live stream live chat. If you're watching on Facebook Live, please feel free to comment there, but be sure to use Twitter or the live stream live chat to talk to us directly and submit questions. We have some awesome prizes today too. We have these cute little Wacom pen holders courtesy of Farfetch Creations. So thank you, Greg Perkins, if you're watching online. So hang on to your raffle tickets in the stage. We have 3 of those to give away. And online, we have a prize for you too. You can win a 1-month subscription to the Gnomon Workshop library. So we'll raffle that off to a lucky winner at the end of the event. To enter, simply share the live stream event URL on Twitter using hashtag Gnomon. And if you're watching on Facebook, to find that, simply go to livestream.com/Gnomon. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our event sponsor, Lenovo. Today's presentation is powered by Lenovo and Intel technology, which our students also use here on the Gnomon campus. So big thanks to Lenovo for supporting Gnomon events and helping us to bring these free events to you. So we hope you enjoyed today's talks. So let's have another round of applause, and we'll hand over to Anouk. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me here to the school. I get a little tour later on, so I'm super excited of what everybody's doing here. As being said, my name is Anouk Wipprecht, and I'm a Dutch fashion tech designer. And in the Netherlands, we sometimes do the things a little bit different. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my work, where I came from, and sort of what my vision was, which started in the beginning of 2000. I started myself when I was pretty young. I was 14 years old. I started with fashion design. For me, I thought that fashion design was interesting. I was a little bit introvert when I was younger, and I saw all fashion in clips, especially also Hollywood productions, for example, and all of that stuff. And I saw that fashion was really used as an expressor and as a communicator. So other than we are wearing garments to shelter us, to keep us warm, to protecting us, and so we're not naked in a way, of course. Fashion had something else to do, which I thought was really interesting, really expressing and communicating. So expressing who we are as personality, as culture, or, for example, also communicating our mood, sort of, And I thought that was really interesting. So this is why I got into fashion when I was 14 years old. In the Netherlands, you can do that pretty young, sort of. But as I was studying fashion, the fabrics that I was using and the designs that I was creating were, they were not reactive. They were not going into any dialogue with the body or the wearer or the surroundings. For me, these fabrics and these designs were analog. And that was something that I discovered by doing it. I got really good at couture and tailoring, but when I was 18 years old, I got another interest, and that is robotics. So I started with combining, actually in the beginning, really big computers on the body, which was not necessarily that sexy, and that was in the beginning of 2000. So I was looking into the field of robotics, because for me, these robots, they had the brain and they had the heartbeat, which I wanted my designs to have. So I got to work with, in the beginning, after putting these computers on the body, with a small module, a little platform called Arduino, which is an open source platform board created in the beginning of 2000 by a team in Italy under the lead of David and Massimo and a bunch of other guys. And in the beginning of 2000, they were prototyping this with this board, like, hey, where can we go to and how can we create a community? And I heard that one of the founders of Arduino, David Kwarteles, was in Sweden. So basically, I packed my bags and I went to Sweden. I said bye to my fashion study for so long, because there was not necessarily an allowance for me to be at fashion school, sort of, and being busy with electronics, because they didn't understand why I was putting computers on the body. They did not understand why I was looking to seek a dialogue with technology. There was at that time no interdisciplinary focus in schooling, which there is now, which I'm super, super happy for, and this is why I myself work with students as well. But at that time, there was none, sort of. So I packed my bags, I said bye to my fashion school, and I moved to Sweden to understand what they were doing there. And this little computer board allowed me to work with a really small module and to connect like little motors, little servos to it. So what I was doing in the beginning of 2000, I was making with them in the lab in Sweden, like fabrics move and pull and like create some kind of interactions with LED, for example, and all of that stuff. And from that point on, it really made sense to me, you know, the notion of like sort of this robotic notion that garments can have, this soft and sensoric dialogue that it can have with the body and the surroundings. And this is how I started with electronics and making the coupling and putting these sensors to my design. So that's a little bit my background, and I will show you through the next 30 minutes a few of my projects. If there are questions afterwards, I'm talking a lot about like maybe the robotics, the design. I try to catch a little bit of everything. So if there's questions afterwards, I'm happy to answer them. Also, if you have more specific questions, come to me, and yeah, maybe you want to know some websites or some software or like some things that I can help you with. Yeah, so basically what I do now, I do this for 10 or 12 years. I work a lot with the industry, so I work with big technology companies, I work with the entertainment industry. The first time that I came actually to America, that's a funny story, was in 2011. I do not have it here on my slide, this is another project, but it's funny to name, it's for the Super Bowl. It were the Black Eyed Peas, and I got a call that there was something going on in America. It was a big sporting game, and I was in Europe, I was in the Netherlands, you know, and I was like, oh cool, football game, it's not that big, you know, oh we can do this. And that was for the Black Eyed Peas at the Super Bowl. What I did not know was that your football games are really big, sort of. So in 2011, I came with my suitcase and the design here, and I was like, oh, okay, great. This is like 200 times bigger than expected, sort of, because you guys like the. Yeah, taking it by the hand. And that was in 2011, so basically that was a project under the lead of Bea Akkerlund. She's a big stylist here in Hollywood, and she asked me to come over to work with her. Unfortunately, I did not put the slides up, but if you look at Super Bowl, Black Eyed Peas 2011, you see a shield, and it was inspired by a football shield of your gamers, and it was laid in with both Swarovskis as high power LEDs. And what was cool about that was that the Swarovskis that it was in place with were functioning like the heatsink. So a high power LED needs it has a lot of heat, and that needs to be dispersed. So normally you use a heatsink, and that's not that sexy, sort of, you know. So I was also working with Swarovski at that time, and I was like, hey, cool, I can take some of the Swarovskis out and put them in, and they can function as a heatsink in a way. So that was a really fun project, in where I really got to see and and got to work with the entertainment industry here in Hollywood and how you guys are doing productions, which I think is really cool. Yeah, so the Black Eyed Peas here was one thing. We did some other things with some of the celebrities here. For me, it was mainly, especially also in the time, pushing a button and an effect was happening. And I was a little bit more looking for the dialogue with technology. How can you place sensors on there? But also working, not only pushing a button and an effect is happening, but how can you have a symbiotic coexistence with technology? So I myself got driven a little bit more to San Francisco, where I had more the allowance to talk about like the symbiosis with technology. I think now in LA it's a little bit more there, like the notion of like uncontrolled interfaces instead of like controlled interfaces, which I really like, things that come out of the screen that are real sort of, because why would I make a costume here which is being taken over by CGI in the end, you know? So that's always for me like an interesting discussion, but I want to make things real sort of, so I work a lot with sensors and personal interactions. This is a project where I work with the industry. For example, Audi came up to me. Audi is a car brand, and they came up to me in 2015 and they said like, "Hey Anouk, we're launching this new car and we want to have something badass, you know, and we really like your designs and we think they're badass as well. And how can we make here a collaboration sort of?" So I told them like, "Okay, that's cool." They had the all-new Audi A4, which you can see here, and I said like, "Okay, cool, give me a car." And they were like, "Okay," like, but I didn't want to have a car to drive in. I wanted to have a car to hack. So what I did was I took out the parking sensors and the LED matrix headlights, which you can see here, and I put them in the dresses, sort of. So I wanted to build dresses that look like cars, sort of, and hacking or sort of reverse engineering their car into these dresses. So that was a really fun project. These are 4 of the dresses. In total, there are 11 dresses, and they are walking on the big car show in China at the moment, 120 shows. So this is something about reliability. I had for this project 1.5 months, so that's not that much. I was working at Microsoft in Seattle. I got a call from the car industry from this, like, "Hey Anouk, we need you, because we know you work fast." And I was like, "Oh yes, of course," but 1.5 months there's not that much time for like a whole reconsideration, reverse engineering, and like producing a collection of 11 designs. But I flew in and I did it with a small team of me and 2 other hackers in Berlin, so that was really fun. They helped me out, one girl named Tank, and yeah, basically we worked like 1.5 months, like 24/7 on this. And yeah, what we did is, for example, here you can see 60 watts high power LEDs coming out of this design. As soon as you come close, there's sensors. The parking sensors are in the front, under her chin. So as soon as the design is detecting movement, it starts to shine. What I'm using is a really small microcomputer micro module. This is the Teensy. The Teensy is created by Paul Stoffenregen in Portland. This is the little microcontroller that I mostly use to prototype my designs with. It has its own language. It's called Teensy Arduino, which you do over Arduino, so it's an Arduino language. Arduino is a derivative from C. C would be the mothership, sort of. Arduino is a really simplified version of like programming, which is easy to use, and it also has a big community. The Arduino community is huge. It's really big, and it's open source. That means that like you're producing code, you're putting it online, you're sharing it, other people take it, maybe twist it, and it's all to just learn and educate. You know, it's the open source community is really important, especially I assume in America, because education is really expensive here. So yeah, open source gives the opportunity to buy a little module of like $20, and you can create interactions with it, buy code that you can either create yourself or you can take from people that's already posted this, sort of. So I'm sure that most of you guys are known to this, sort of, but I just want to point out the importance of that for me as well. So this is one of the other designs that I'm working on at the moment. It has 11 little servo motors, and it's pushing out of its shape. So I'm just showing you like some of the developments regarding to that. So making renderings is always, of course, as you guys know, like really important for the clients. This was a dress that was also on the catwalk that you can see here in the right corner, which had projection mapping on there. So it was live traced and projection mapped upon in these shapes during the shows that they were rocking, sort of. And yeah, for me, it's a little bit about blurring the lines. It was for me about blurring the lines. What is a car, and what is what is a design, sort of, you know, for example, or where can that merge and mix. And For me, it was also a statement, and a statement that I could work on with Audi. I've been to car shows a lot, and some of the car shows are not really nice, I find, to women, you know? And yeah, you see like sort of Jaguars and the Lamborghinis, and then you have the girls in the short skirts, and they're tigering over these cars. And it is something that me as a girl, sort of, you know, and me having a lot of girls around me, is not necessarily the best image that I want to see at a car show, sort of, you know? So our models at Audi, they're badass. They're like, hey, they have this sort of fuck-off mentality, you know, and that is really, yeah, a little bit of provocation, but that's also something that my DNA as a designer and their identity as a car brand really could merge, you know, and I don't know if that allowance would have been there at the beginning of 2000s, you know, to create these statements, and maybe I can make these statements that the car industry cannot make, sort of, you know, and this is also a little bit important as me coming in as an artist on a 1.5 month project, but trying to create not only a design and a show, but also a statement, you know. This is really important for me, working with my clients, that there's this mutual understanding and respect regarding to that. Another of my dresses is with Cirque du Soleil, and it's a cocktail dress, and literally it's a cocktail dress because it's serving you cocktail shots. So this is a project for Cirque du Soleil. They came up to me and they have a restaurant in Ibiza. They have a nightclub in Las Vegas and a restaurant in Ibiza. So this is not necessarily the theater, but they wanted me to do something with the food experience. So I wanted to make an on-body food experience, and I just thought it was a witty thing of creating a cocktail dress. So basically it has a peristaltic pump on the back from Party Robotics. It's a company in San Francisco which is creating peristaltic pumps, which is in a 3D printed back piece. And these dresses are walking around in the restaurant. So this is the restaurant Heart Ibiza. They are there in gold, they're there in pink, in black, and in white. And you can also see here in the corner, I don't have the picture of it, but I also created another design which had a bubble gum in the shoulder. And I thought it was a great idea, like you have a cocktail dress and then a girl who's like shooting bubble gum. But I guess it's like the things that are in your head might sometimes be more better working, sort of. Because what happened with the bubblegum girl, she was shooting the bubblegum in people's faces and all that stuff. So in theory, sort of, it didn't quite work out. So the restaurant said like, oh, Anouk, we really like the cocktail dress, but maybe we're gonna only keep the bubblegum dress for special occasions, sort of. So sometimes you cannot really foresee. You can think like, oh, cool, the mechanism is so sweet and it's all working and all, but then you have the human interaction, sort of. And here I saw that very literally. So we kept the cocktail dress in there. So my main research is what I already said, sort of, on how we can interface, how we can interact with in a new way with by using fashion as an interface in a way, how we can set new kinds of sort of experiences, or how we can interface with each other in new ways. So basically, I take the body in consideration, and if you look at the body, we all have spaces around us. Which I use in my design when I'm designing systems. So we all have the intimate space, the personal space, the social, and the public. So I take these spaces in consideration, and these spaces all have different boundaries. I'm going to tell a little bit about this later on. And these spaces are depending on like who we are as a person, but also culturally, but also depending on our moods. Like if I'm sort of more grumpy, I might want to have less people around me or people in my personal space. And that's one of my fascinations. The other thing that I'm doing is I connect this to animals. So, for example, I look a lot at animals. So this you can call you can talk about biomimicry. So taking inspiration from nature, how you can mimic nature, like the way plants grow, the way structures are being born, for example. What I do regarding to biomimicry, I look a lot at the behaviors of animals. So, for example, defense mechanisms are super interesting, and how animals sort of socialize with each other, how they are communicating with each other. So this is one of the animals that one of my dresses is based on. So it's an octopus or a celipod, and basically when this animal is getting scared, it's pushing out ink, so it can dive away, it can hide itself, sort of. So I took this notion into one of my dresses. it's a sensoric smoke dress. So basically, there are sensors built into this design, and the more people there are around this dress, the more smoke it evokes. So the more smoke comes out of it, sort of. So that is one of my valuable dresses, because this is a pretty friendly dress, yet it has a really big catch, because basically if my model is walking around, I can see exactly where she is, and also how much people she had around her, sort of, you know. Because she's leaving just this trail of smoke in the space, which is going way further than the body. Sort of, it's really mounting into the space itself, which I find very interesting. So this dress I created in Autodesk Maya. I work a lot with Autodesk software. I work a lot else. Also, at the moment, I'm at Pier 9 in San Francisco. It's a big workshop of Autodesk where they have water jets, they have 3D printers and CNC. So often in my downtime, I'm there to work on projects. So in here, using Autodesk Maya with a friend of mine, he's an Italian architect called Niccolo Casas, and together we were trying to find out if you have smoke coming out. I had a few other designs that were based on smoke. So this dress is not just this dress. It had 9 iterations from my first dress in like 2005, 2006, being a drip system with CO2 and dry ice, so that created the smoke. Then it went to trying to create the smoke using smoke machines, then a sort of a vaporizer, to this silicon-based system. And then is the question with this dress, okay, if we're doing this in like using 3D printing, how can we not only have the smoke pushing out? What I want to do is create this bubble, which you see here in the hip. So the smoke is being pushed into the hip area, it swirls around, and then it's being pushed out to the little sidelines of this dress. And the other thing, if you're creating such a shell-like structure, and this was in 2011, seeing how 3D printing can not only be this shell, but also seeing how you can use different ways, so it can have a little bit of flexibility. So I was working at Materialize, which is a 3D printing company in Leuven, in Belgium, at that time, and they had a new material called TPU, so thermoplastic polyurethane. And this is a process called selective laser sintering. So most of my designs are being done in selective laser sintering, because I can create and I can design a much more extravagant geometry regarding to this. So for the people that are not necessarily that known to 3D printing, basically for now the most rigorous ways are 3 ways of printing. One is in your plastics, in your PLAs. One is in your resins and your liquids, and the other one would be powder printing. So the process that I'm using is a powder printing process. So it has a CO2 laser beam, which is going into the process chamber, which has a slider. So it slides one layer after the other, and it's materializing the file using the CO2 laser beam. And the advantage of this process is that basically I take out my design, all the powder falls off, and for this technique you do not need any support material. The chamber, the bounding box, is pretty big, sort of. So especially for me in 2011, 2012, this was really valuable, creating bigger pieces, sort of, or giving me the allowance of creating bigger pieces. So here you can see SLS in TPU, and here you can see a sort of the weaving pattern that we mechanized it for. So the outer layer is still a little bit shell-like, and the inner layer is then printed with the use of TPU here. So the other thing is that I do not only want to connect the body to the surroundings, sort of. That's one of my main interests, because like the surroundings of us are causing a lot of stress, sort of. So this is something that I'm trying to explore, but then also trying to consider what the body is doing. So wireless biosignals and connecting the body into its environment. So what I'm using is different sets of biosignals. So I'm using, for example, EEG, so brain signals. I'm using pulse, BVP, EMG, muscle contraction, EDA, so skin conductancy or galvanic skin response. One of the biggest researches regarding to this has been done by MIT, and they recently dropped it because the galvanic skin response and the pH, sort of, it's still a little bit hard to do research in. Respiration, so the lung volume is a really interesting one. Most of the people are trying to get emotional data, sort of per se, emotional data from HRV, so heart rate and the volume. But I think the way we are using our lungs and the way we're breathing, you can actually get a lot of sort of semi-emotional data out of accelerometers, so place in space of your body parts. The heart rate and also the heart volume and temperature. So all these sensors have a different placement on the body, as I'm trying to already show you. You know, different kind of signals want to be measured in a different way, really specifically to how your body is built, you know, and the ecosystem of your body. I often get, also now at the moment I'm working with a big jewelry company, I often get the question from my clients, especially when it comes to jewelry. They say like, hey Anouk, we want to have an emotion sensing jewelry piece, which is tracking emotions or the mood. And I often need to tell my client, like, well, first of all, like nobody can reliably measure emotions, so that's not possible. And the other thing is, if we can, it's not going to look sexy, because it will basically be, at this point of time, still a little bit a whole exoskeleton of all these sensors on the body. And then you still need to have a survey or a chatbot situation asking like, hey, I'm detecting this. Do you feel this way, or is this happening, you know? So it's also the persona itself. And then the third factor is that even we humans ourselves don't know how we feel often, sort of, you know. So this is interesting for me. But then, the other hand, you also have the industry that is trying to produce these ideas. So there's something called speculative design. So things that actually are more speculative, that are actually not working. And this is something that I have to deal with in my daily life, working with clients from day to day. And that's a little bit hard, because the client says like, yeah, but this is detecting moods and it's really small, and hey, this is detecting emotions, and hey, this sweater, you know. And I need to say like, well, most of these are prototypes, most of these are concepts, and most of these are Kickstarters. This means that they might happen in 3 years, and they probably not, sort of, you know. So this is something that's sort of regarding to the industry, and like really, like what I always say, if we are creating these instruments on the body, like make sure that they work for real, and don't go tell stories, you know, because this is really damaging the industry, you know. Like there are some interesting ways of being able to do that. But for example, a neck-worn, like little jewelry piece, that is still the question of like, yeah, do you want to make it? Do you want to urge for design, sort of a small module around your neck, or do you want to go for genuine data, something that's really reliably working here? But what I'm trying to do still is trying to combine different sets of these technologies on the body. So trying to see how I can use EEG and what I can get out of that, for example. One of the things that I did when I was working for Intel in 2013, 2014, I worked at New Device Group in Portland, Hillsborough, and they gave me the access to the Intel Edison. So the Intel Edison is a module, computer module, and they were looking at how they could connect to the makers, sort of, and to the designers and the architects. So I was one of the people in that was there creating dresses out of it, which was really fun. What I did, I used a commercial device, a NeuroSky, which is more for me, again, about EMG. So it's about muscle contraction of how we use our eyes. I don't know how many of you guys are working or work with NeuroSky, for example. But most of the commercial devices are cool because they're pretty cheap. But they're a little bit more, when you talk about attention, it's more about the ways we use our eyebrows and we use our eyes and where that goes to, sort of. But I used a 2-point electrode system, which I hacked the NeuroSky for, and I placed a little camera in the front of the dress of my model. And what I was doing is, while she was walking at it was CES, it's a big technology trade show. I was measuring who was coming in her environment. I was seeing, because of the little camera in the front of her dress, what was happening, what she saw, and I was also seeing how her body was reacting. So it was for me a little bit more research device, in where my model was like, she was walking around, she was blinking, because every time when her attention springs, sort of these LEDs went on, and people were like, oh, cool, you know. But for me, it was really the research on like, okay, she's moving through this space, and what can I see, and what statements can I make on her stress level, and what statements can I make on her stress level versus the people that are around her or the things that she sees, sort of. So that is a little bit a design for me, which is a little bit more research-based, but it's really dear to me because I learned a lot from that. So from that project, I went on to something else. I got the opportunity to work at Ars Electronica in Linz. It's a big media center in the beginning of last year. And I want to use a little bit of term of sort of gamifying fashion to develop a device instead of a dress, and a device that could help with something in a playful way, you know, and making it fun and accessible. So I took actually the notion of this dress with a little camera in there, and I put it into a headset, and a headset which is a unicorn horn. And we all know that unicorns are cool. So just to point it out, they're really cool. But I used a little bit the unicorn horn as a trick. And what I want to do is I want to work with children with ADHD, which people see often as an illness, which I do not understand. It's like more people have, and especially kids, they have a lot of things happening around them, which gets them exciting, you know. And so there's a lot of impulses, and then kids with ADHD might have a little bit more impulses around them, sort of, you know. But often this gets treated really medical. So you have a child in, I don't know if I have a picture, this is just from Google, for example, it's very dramatic, but this is called the 10-20 system, of where people get measured with. So medical EEG, you measure by the 10-20 system, and then you're conserving all the brain signals coming in, and you're relating them to each other. What I wanted to do is I wanted to create a notion in where I use these electrodes, and not to measure the brain at all times. I wanted to use it as an on and off switch. So I wanted to use a reliably set of EEG data in order to make the camera just go on and off when the attention would be striking. So what I was researching was the 10-20 system, and I found that there's a wave. It's called the P3 wave, so the P300 of ERP. And it was cool because it's created a mohawk on the head, sort of, you know. And I was able to place then electrodes in the back of the head, and then use this shape in order to conform the design of this unicorn horn. And by placing the camera in there, I wanted to see what, first of all, the kids really saw as having a second set of eyes on the head, sort of. And I also want to see how that could behave, and if it would be functional or like in any kind in the first stage, sort of. So I made a little movie according to that, and then I went up to Ars Electronica. Like this is a little bit the idea of this is a little bit what I want to do here. So people liked it, and then I got a whole team of Ars Electronica by my side, sort of, in order to work this out. So that's really cool. So then we started with like how to make this again reliable and genuine, sort of, you know. So I was in Austria, in Linz, and where in Linz also happened to be one of the biggest medical engineering companies. It's called GTech, and they have around 60% of the world market on reliable EEG, medical EEG, sort of. So I went up to them because I saw this a little bit earlier. They have these electrodes, and if you guys are working with electrodes, you need to have a gel in order to conduct, in order to connect to your skin. Well, these electrodes are gold-plated electrodes, and they have like little fingers, which allowed me, in order not to have a whole head full of like gel, you know, these little legs go through the hair, and they're mounting to the skin of the head, sort of. So they are dry electrodes. So what I did was going back to the design, sort of, and embedding these on the points of the P3, and actually trying to measure out if we could get any set of signals out of this. Because if you consider the 10-20 system, you know, is there anything that you can sort of filter out? The system is based on again the Intel Edison, like the camera is connected. This happens to be with a RealSense camera, and basically what it does, it's it's recording whenever the P3 wave is being hit, and that's a three-way potential, so 3 waves, then it's being sent out. The camera starts, and it's always on. It's stepping back 3 seconds, so it records the event, and it's measuring 5 seconds. So you have 3 seconds, the event's happening, calculating back 3 seconds, 5 seconds to the front, so 8 seconds of movie it's sending out, sort of. And what I want to do with this is, first of all, creating a device which is fun and accessible, so hence the unicorn horn. The children walk up to it and they're already in a super playful state because unicorns are awesome, sort of. And we all agree to this. And the other thing is the genuine data, so creating a situation that you can create a reliable, and I'm not measuring here, I'm not measuring the whole situation of the brain, I just wanted to have a button to make the camera go on, sort of, so when this event is being measured, the camera goes on and it's recording, sort of. The third thing, what I want to do is making a statement regarding to kids and ADHD, and that is this one. I think that kids that have ADHD, again, don't see it the illness versus the excitement, of course. I think that children, in our society, parents have a child, and the child is more crowded than another child. They go too easily to the doctor, and they say hey, my child is being crowded. Can it have medicine? And I think that's such a bullshit thing. I think that is so bad. No, I really think putting synthetics in children, especially from such a young age, is really bad, sort of, What I try to do with this device, and we're still, I'm still working with it, we're launching a hackathon, this Ars Electronica, in order to also create more data, sort of, in order from taking this from a child. But what I try to do here is, and how I'm working with these kids, is that I want to not give them medicine. I want to make them understand that anything and everything around them has an effect on them, sort of, So by them seeing, actually, and they're really witty, they really want to see the data, and by them making understand that how their brain works, making them understand that anything and everything around them has an effect on them, and for them to really visually see that in both the data, but also a data visualization, which is their direct third view from the head, sort of, This is also a little bit going into a sort of a psychological notion. And that also has the other side for me, because I'm a little bit egocentric in this way, because I also want to get something out of it. And that's the following, because if you're measuring a child in a medical situation, in a white room with this whole electrode system on the head, sort of, this child, it takes 20 minutes until the child might or might not feel comfortable. And that's the other thing, taking it away from the medical situation and trying to see how I can get genuine data by introducing play in there. So the child walks in, it sees a unicorn horn, it can put it off or put it on, it's not a whole surgery in order to get it reliably on the head, sort of. Can put it on, it's a freedom of fact, they can also take it off again, And you can get more reliably data within 5 minutes instead of 20 or 30 minutes or ever, Because, you need to see the child and you need to capture the child in their natural environment, and that is the moment that they're super busy or super playful, So this is a little bit the other side of the coin regarding to this project. And again, trying to see how you can, with the use of fashion and then maybe a device situation, sort of, how you can make something much more fun and accessible, but also something that is much more free, sort of, to work with from the other side. And it's super utopian image, but that's a little bit what I try to work with. A little bit thinking outside of the box, how we as a community can make these things a little bit. How we can also push the notion of not only the industry, I work with the car industry, the technology industry, but also health and medication. Where can the designers and where can the architects make a difference here? So this is a project sponsored by the EU Commission. So they are really trying to put their heart in on trying to intertwine much more designers and engineers in Europe with medicine and health and all that stuff. So this is sort of an ongoing project for me as a hobby project to see how these developments can exist, sort of, in a way. Sorry to be a little bit brutal, but it's really because I'm still very much into this project, I'm a little bit more fiery about it, sort of, you know. So yeah, but going back to more fun things again these spaces, because these spaces are not at all taught by me. They're not an invention of me. These spaces have been developed by Edward T. Hall in the 60s. So Edward T. Hall, which you can see here, he worked on nonverbal communication, and he was the one that distinguished these spaces. Like later on, of course, other people came like, yeah, but what about the back, and what about like all of these things? But well, he said like, well, that's not necessarily my research. He was in the 60s traveling around a lot, and he saw that different cultures had different personal spaces, sort of, you know. And he tried to describe this, I guess, in his book. This is one of his books, The Hidden Dimension. So for any of you guys that are interested in this notion, you can check it out. But he was discovering that you can make a sort of a status quo of these spaces, and how he was doing that by the measurement of a stick, so a very analog way. So he had a stick, and he would go up to different cultures, and by intuition and by the measurement of the stick, trying to define these spaces, sort of. So what I try to do here is I take his notion of the things that he measured in an analog manner, and I take it to something that we have now, our age. We have sensors. So what I'm using here are sensors, ultrasonic rangefinders. I'm using IR sensors. I'm using radio. Sometimes I'm beaconing things out. But I'm using these sensors to correlate to his model of like 8 meters. So they measure out for 8 meters, for example. And then for the dress that you guys all have seen, I guess, on the poster, there's something else. I couple, again, like a little bit of my research to an animal, because I like animals. But especially this animal. Then I go back to another field of robotics. And in robotics, we have something that we call degree of freedom. So basically, the more degree of freedom your robot has, the more you can do with it. Of course, you can make more interesting movements, but also connected to the notion and the attitude or the behavior of a spider, sort of, you know. Yeah, in robotics, for me, like from a robotics point of view, or if I put on the hat of a roboticist, yeah, the spider legs had a lot of value on sort of creating some kind of interaction. So again, using the Intel Edison, this is a new version, but this is the spider dress. So a lot of people have seen this image and they think like, oh, it looks cool, and like because it really gives you a psychological thrill when you look at it, sort of. But if you interact with this design, and it has proximity sensors, but when you interact with this design and you come into the personal space, the dress has mechanic legs on the shoulders, and it's sort of attacking you in a pretty brutal state. I showed it at CES, and there's all these people in the business suits, you know, and I think the dress has had 3 times that it really mounted into like really literally attack that the person sort of got half stabbed there, sort of. So it's like really don't go into the really don't go super near to this dress, sort of. It's actually inspired. It's a dress. The former one was made from plexiglass, and it had over 200 little screws in there. So basically, whenever the mechanism, you guys, if you use plexiglass and screws, whenever the mechanism was being forced, so when it was interacting, slightly, these little screws were mounting out. So I was, in the end, that was the dress of 2011, 2012, and then in the end, I had to do with like being the person the whole time screwing these legs together again, you know. So I said like, okay, well, I'm working at Intel, and I needed to create a system which was intelligent. So I was like, oh, why don't I take that dress and I make it more intelligent using their Intel Edison module. So that was one of those things here. But the original design has actually been inspired for me by a game called Limbo. I don't know if you guys know this game. It's I guess it's a French game. It's called Limbo, and it's I don't know how you call it. It's the same game as Mario. So you go through this world. It's a black and white world. But there's a spider in there, and there's like a little boy. And whenever the boy comes closer to the spider wants to get him. So you run away, sort of, you know. So the closer you come. And it's really this sensoric behavior of the boy coming closer and the spider trying to merge in there that I thought was really interesting. So that is a little bit the concept of the first dress of this, sort of. So not only looking at how a mechanism can attack, but how can it attack based on how you walk into this space. So basically what I programmed in this dress is something that I call 12 states of behavior. So depending on how you walk into this dress, so when you walk up very fast, very close, it's really attacking you very fast. So when you come a little bit more in a twirly movement, like this, the sideways, go in and out, like, hey, I see you, a little bit, you know. When you just approach very slowly, it's more dancing, but then when you come close, it goes into a sort of a fencing mode, in where I call it Jugendstil, where the back legs go to the back and the front legs go to the front. If you're standing too far away, but it sees you slightly, it puts its legs up in the air and it does a sort of na 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 na, sort of as if it wants to be catched, sort of. So basically, it's this whole scala and on possibilities on dances that it can make and movements that it can make. So from a behavioral aspect, this dress is really, really dear to me. Like all my dresses are like babies to me, because I know exactly how they are interacting and interfering, sort of. At this moment of time, I have 37 dresses, and they are all connected in a different way to the body and the surroundings, sort of. But from a behavioral aspect, this is one that I personally always really like. Yeah, so basically it's servo-based. I don't know if I have a little, I don't have the other one. I'm using a Hobby King servo, so pretty cheap servos. They're 939, if you guys want to look up the model number. They are in all the hinges. So the base hinge in the shoulder plate has 2 servos in there, so basically it can move this way and this way. And then the legs itself, they only can move in one way, sort of, but it's allowing, using also the 6 legs, in order to like sort of create an animation. If you look at the dress itself, like I've been working with Studio Palermo from Vienna in Germany. We've been looking at the cerebral, the bones, sort of, and using bird bones, snake bones, like looking at different kinds of bones that could be adapted into the bodies of the design, sort of. And what is really important here, because as I said, this dress gives you a psychological thrill when you look at it, also when you interact with it, because it's really brutally attacking you, sort of, you know. So this is why it's almost as if this dress, absorbed or like ate all of these animals, sort of. Looking at the kidneys, it has a respiration sensor. Because with my former dress, the black dress, the dress was basically always attacking if you're standing into the personal space. And I was like, well, that's not a symbiosis with the model at all, you know, with the wearer wearing my dress. So in this dress, I put a respiration sensor in there. So whenever she has somebody around her and it's a friend, she can breathe in and breathe out. And again, I'm using it as a button. So it makes the system go in a sleepy mode. So, and in the design, you can see that in the kidneys. So the respiration sensors are in the kidneys that you can see up. And then the sensors, the proximity sensors, are in front because they needed to beam out. So basically, 2 proximity sensors, and they're beaming out, seeing who comes into the personal space. And looking at spiders, they have a lot of eyes. So the eyes of the spider are under the chin, and this is where the proximity sensors are in, that are doing the measurements. Yeah, so basically, here you can see them under the chin. You can see them in the balls there. And for me, it's really important to like sort of see fashion as an interface, something that goes beyond just the blinkies and the bleeps that we can create with that, sort of like how can you interface in new ways with your surroundings using fashion. In such a way, for example, but then also for me this interface became a tool. So here you can see the back part, the kidneys, the sensors, the proximity sensor in the front. And we also created some spiders, because that's the thing that I want to close down with. We created these spiders to sort of go with the dress. The dress was being presented at CES, and she also had an army of like spiders walking with her, sort of. Later on, the spiders became autonomous, so they're doing a dance now, sort of, so that's pretty cute. But they're also created, the dress itself is also created from SLS, so I'm using an PA16 and a PA12, so for depending on the weight of the legs. I'm using nylon for the front part. And these spiders were also printed in SLS. The dress itself is hand-painted, which I would not do in once. I would take out the balls, paint them, and place them in again. But it's a full, like the whole body was printed at one. And the bodies and all the white parts have been primed, sprayed, and put a lacquer over there. So it has a little bit of pearl dust, so the paint, a layer of pearl dust, and then lac over it so the pearl dust doesn't fall off of it. So, but going back to these spiders we created for the Maker Faire, because basically the spider dress was also meant for a little bit the makers, like the notion of what you can do with the Intel Edison. And then like a dress you cannot always like let walk around on these events in the Maker Faire. That's like a lot of work. So we created these spiders as well. But the funny story about these spiders, and that's again something that you think like, oh, in design sort of. Sometimes I'm standing there was standing there with the spiders. Sometimes we have people, so here somebody's standing with the spiders. But we thought like, okay, we have like 6 or 8 spiders on a platform, is cool. Just one person from Intel there, just guiding the spiders, and is there to talk to the audience because they want to know how the spiders work and like some information about it. What we ended up with, for every spider that we needed, we need one person from Intel to be there, because these children, this is something that you cannot, again, not really think of, but these children take the spiders and then they run away. So they are like, oh, they're so cute, and then they're off. And I don't know if you guys have been to the Maker Faire, but it's pretty big there, you know? So now for every spider, we needed to have a guard as well. So that was a really funny thing for me, again, like with the cocktail dress and the bubble gum, like some things that you cannot really, you can never really foresee on where those interactions are going to, because the kids really want to get physical with the spiders in a way. So I think that's a funny notion. But yeah, going back to this spider dress and these spiders sort of, what I always say is like you can, and we all can make couture, we can make design, we can make movies, we can make all of that. And I think that's also partially of having a school, for example, but also something that you can do as a designer or an architect or as an engineer yourself is education. Again, I'm trying to point you on this, like making and sharing with your community. So I'm pretty open source. I put things on Instructables. If people want to know things, you want to have the spider dress, so I give you the files, make something cool with it. Like, I don't care, you know. For me, the notion is like, you can make cool shit, you can make couture, you can make the most beautiful couture that you can make, sort of. But if you're not sharing it with your community, in a way, it falls dead, sort of, you know. So always think, whether you're a designer, an engineer, a cook, like whatever you are, sort of, you know, how can I share back with the community? How can I do something with kids and the new generation sort of growing up, you know? So for my community, speaking for my community, sort of, there are a few things, like if you're writing code, or if you want to learn more about code, if you want to use it, there's something called GitHub. There's a really big community, like Arduino has also a big community, of people like writing code and uploading it for others to use, sort of, and to share and care. You have things like, for example, Thingiverse was for like 3D files, so people are uploading, so I make a ring, and I was, oh cool, maybe other people, I figured out how to make this ring, it's not interesting for me, I put it on Thingiverse, and somebody else can take it and print it out, you know, and I think that's really cute. You have Instructables, it's sort of a do-it-yourself website, so most of my dresses, like the cocktail dress is on there, so if you want to have a step-by-step on how to make that. I have kitty ears, electronic kitty ears, if you want to make those, it's all free, you go there, you print it out, I don't get any money for it, I just want people to enjoy this sort of, like I am enjoying. I'm sometimes also using code from GitHub or files from Thingiverse, and I would use that as a base, for example, you know. So it's really important to take something, but also what are you giving back again, sort of. So Instructables is a website from like how to make a robotic cocktail dress to how can I make tomato soup, you know. Everything is on there. So whatever your skill is, try to make an Instructable. So it's really cool. You get a lot of fun feedback of like, yay, thank you for doing that. Hexter.io is a little bit the Instructables for hardware. So a lot of hardware projects are on here. So that's pretty cool if you want to learn more about a certain module or whatever. You can see there. And also OpenBCI, because I'm now the last 2-3 years, I'm a lot into the EEG sort of, you know, so into the brain. So OpenBCI stands for Open Brain Computer Interface. So there's a whole community because, again, like the interfaces, for example, me working with GTech, like the medical engineering company, I work with a system of $3,000, and I can do that because I happen to have the residency, but not everybody has access to that. So this is a little bit where OpenBCI comes in. What I said, like you have the commercial devices, they're cheap and they don't do that much. And you have the medical devices, and they're really expensive, but they are correct and they're genuine. So OpenBCI is trying to fight that notion, like, hey, where can we all as neuroscientists come in and create a new device which can be open source and be used by a lot of people, because EEG is like really interesting regarding to getting data out of that. Yeah, so I think my time is gone here. So basically, yeah, my story is a little bit about the analog. I started with fashion design. I thought it was cool. What I was missing was the digital. I was missing the interaction. I was missing the electronic. So I started to combine that with, or very interdisciplinary with, for example, robotics and all that stuff. Seeing fashion as an interface, and also this interface then becoming a tool. And then thinking in different ways. For example, what I talked about, making different things, for example, a playful interface, thinking of emotional interfaces, and, for example, also social interfaces. So really thinking deeper of, especially like, instead of like pushing a button and an effect is happening, how can this conform this notion? How can this conform an idea? And how can this create another sense or another dialogue using technology as your base, sort of? So that's, that's a little bit the end. I talk very fast, I talk a lot, and I have a lot of slides. So if you guys have questions, I think there's a microphone here, so feel free to ask them, or otherwise come up to me afterwards if there's something.
Awesome, thank you so much. That was amazing. Can we have a round of applause? We do have time to take some questions. We took a little break, so we'll give some more time for that. Does anyone want to raise their hand and put your question? Yes? Okay, let me just run back.
Hey, Anna, first of all, awesome presentation, thank you. I've been following your work. Can you talk about making this mainstream, like, you know, some of the challenges with washing and powering these systems? Have you looked into that? Because these are all custom systems, right?
Yeah, so this is a question about like making wearables mainstream, of course, right? So my designs, I'm a little bit more of a researcher. So what I said, I have 37 designs. They are all differently connected to the body. And I make them, and then I get bored, not bored, but they are there. They're in existence, and I move on. So I'm not necessarily really producing these items. So this is what your question is also directed on. So in the wearables industry, we have to deal with a few things. And there's 4 things how I would describe them. And I can go through some of the designs that I'm making. So the first one would be energizing. So how to energize your design. So the ideal situation is you have solar, and you're walking around, and your dress is being energized while you're doing your thing, right? And then that is being used, however, sort of like using solar. It's not that far yet to create something that my spider dress can work on. You can do things, you can energize things for like low power situations, but the effects are not like steering motors or making things boom and mechanized, sort of, you know. You can use solar, and like a little LED is blinking, blah blah blah. So basically, for my IDs, I'm using still often like LiPo batteries. You know, the batteries that are in cars, that are like in the self-driving cars, that are in the drones. So these are, for example, LiPo batteries. I have like a cutout circuit. I have an under voltage protectors. I have all of that stuff. So these things are not blowing up, but basically they're little bombs, right? So that is one thing, you know, like for me to make these things and these effects really reliable, I really need to sit down with the battery industry, like, hey, dudes, how do we do this? Because this goes way beyond what I can do with that sort of, So I do a lot, like if I make smaller things or jewelry piece, I'm working with Swarovski now, for example, we're using crystal and a solar panel behind it. The crystal makes that the sun and the light falls in a beam and it stores it, so we can store much more. So this is really cool, but still it's low power that we're working with, sort of, But this is not necessarily, this is also a little bit a question on the battery industry. How can that be, There's a series of new batteries coming out. They start to come out now in the next 2 years, sort of, which might be interesting. According to that, they might be more safe. But that is one thing in order to create my ideas to take them to production. Like, it still has to do, and it still needs to bounce on a little bomb of energy, which my babies need, They need a lot of food. So, and the battery industry cannot give that maybe at a safe way or a safe manner. So if I, my designs are pretty safe. They're running on 5 volts. My designs run on 5 volt, not higher than 12 volts in a way, So not that much can happen there. And again, they're well protected, protection circuits, under voltage regulators, all of that stuff. But yeah, that is one thing, like wearables and lipo batteries. And I think you want to spring that discussion earlier already. That's one thing, of course, and that's something that I really always try to push the battery industry to work with, Like I say, the 3D printing industry, I go to them like, hey, we still need to put plastics and rubbers on our body. How can we hassle that, So I think a lot of steps, we think that we're close, but there's a lot of steps still being taken. So this is part 1. Sorry, it's going to be a long story. And this is energizing, right? So the other thing would be, which one shall I pick? Okay, washability, So, hey, 3D print, like how am I going to wash this spider dress? It's not going to be like in the washing machine, So like, for example, like how can we not only think we are trying to wash our electronics with water, right? So we try to make them, a lot of people are busy with like the flexible circuits and how can we wash them with water and blah, 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 but is this the way that our wearables are going to be washed, Or is there another washing machine that can be developed in order to both clean but also energize at the same time, So I'm interested in that where, hey, washing machine industry, How can we have that talk, for example? And I guess that's a little bit happening with AEG or some of the washing machine companies. They start to create actually symposiums that I then get invited to talk about my issues. Like, hey, well, how can we do this? And I think, again, this is also opening up, but the industry, I always say the tech industry has been looking into fashion tech. I do this for like 10, 12 years. The tech industry came in about like 3 to 5 years ago. The fashion industry came in maybe 1 to 2 years ago, So it's fairly new. And now all these other product things, like a washing machine and all, also needs to bounce in, sort of, So I think the talk with the industry needs to be happening much more and more. At the other hand, it's happening, so it's about incubation time and actually really creating these new machines that are maybe able to do those things. So you have energizing, then you have washability, right? So the third one would be maintenance. So if I sell you my spider dress, my smoke dress, like what would happen, like you, I know you're a boy, but might be another suit, sort of, but you want to wear my dress tonight, And it breaks, So what do? Are you witty enough to make it yourself? Like, are you there to reprogram and fix all the wires? Do you need to send it back? Then you don't have to dress in the evening, but like a glowing lamp or a piece of other technology, hey, it's not working, your MacBook is broken, you send it back. Or are you going to a repair shop and like your MacBook is broken, hey, my dress is broken, and is there a new kind of, sort of a dressmaker in the city that you would go to, Or is it open source? So I send you my files, you make it yourself, and because you make it yourself, you know how to fix it, So this is about maintaining, the discussion around maintaining. How do you maintain your designs, and what happens if they're breaking, And then the fourth one would be networking. What happens if you, and that doesn't matter with this, if your network is out for the spider dresses, like you can still protect yourself in a way with these concepts in a way, right? But if you have your wearables relying on you, especially when it goes into health and all of that stuff, and your wearables are relying on network, and what happens if you are out in the ocean, on the sea? What happens if you are far in the desert, What happens if your network is falling out? Because we are now in an age that it's not only working the push of a button, button. There's a sensor in there. We're also talking about machine learning and artificial intelligence and all that stuff, or computer vision. Especially with machine learning, you need to have a certain amount of data coming in at all times, otherwise your algorithm would be like sort of messed up in a way. So what happens if your network falls out there, for example? You can also think of those situations. So I think, and then the fifth one would be, for example, also network, also things around privacy, and then safety, you know? So privacy would be like, well, that's cool having a camera in there, of course, with the Google Glass and the speculars from Snapchat, but it's still a thing around privacy, for example. And then you can go on and on. Safety, you know, again, the LiPo batteries versus like all of these things, you know. And safety, I guess, is also a lot about making rules, you know. Like we are needing rules, we need rules regarding to artificial intelligence, like we need rules regarding to robotics. We also need rules regarding to safety of these wearables, because again, if people are using LiPos, and I know how to use them, but if somebody else would go to my instructables and would hook things up, or would think, like a lot of people are working at the moment with fashion and LiPos, for example, and they might not have these voltage regulators and these cutout circuits, sort of, you know. So what about that, and what can be rules and things on that in order for it to make a product, sort of. So there's a lot of things regarding to that, and for example, lawyers are stepping up to help, and a lot of people start to combine themselves in order to really work on these situations. And I think, what I say, it's a pretty complex thing. So I know it's not the answer that you were waiting for. You were like, oh, just do this and this and you have it in the store. No, it's actually a lot of talk and a lot of discussion and a lot of development that we still need to do. But in a way, like for example, I get sponsored by big companies, and by me doing this research, they also learn from us. They learn from the designers and the architects and whoever is embedded in that field. So the field is pretty complicated, but it's also, there's like a lot of people who are really on solving this fight, sort of, you know, to see how we can create this poetic, utopian coexistence with these technologies around us. But that's also because most of us know that a new wave of interfacing in this kind is really a possibility and really cool, you know. So, what I say, I think we need much more talk still with the industry, sort of. And again, it is happening. It's just about incubation time. So, yeah, I will try to give the next answer shorter, but.
Okay, we have more questions.
Thank you so much. The designs are beautiful. I was in fashion for many years, and stuff like this is really the reason I got into fashion as art. Mm-hmm. Being in the industry for many years, I realized I was more interested in the design aspect as opposed to the marketability. So to see this type of work is really exciting. Cool. So I've moved now into filmmaking. So my question for you is how does a filmmaker commission these types of pieces to use in film? Would I, like you were saying, get the files and print them myself, or what are the steps to take to be able to utilize pieces like this or connect with other designers that use this type of technology as costume design in filmmaking?
I think I have 4 words for you, and it's using your own imagination. Because I think whatever you want to create, you don't want to, you say you don't want to copy paste, you want to copy morph, right? So take these ideas and go to the websites, for example, that I told you about, right? Or start to see how you can create your own ideas, maybe using the basics, what I'm using. What do I use? I use 3D prints, I use microcontroller, and I use sensors. And all these designs are different, you know? So whatever you're using there, sort of, I guess it's up to your own imagination. There's a lot online on the internet. A lot of my friends and the architects and the designers that I have around me are self-taught, sort of, you know. So it depends if you want to if your question would be like stepping into electronics, stepping into, like, I don't know exactly where you want to do that from, sort of. Regarding to the film industry, what I always have is, again, like a lot of filmmakers come up to me and they say like, hey, do you want to work on this and that? And I'm alpha, like, so I'm also a filmmaker in a way. I create my own stories, you know. So this is a little bit, the problem that I have is like, yeah, well, but if I want to know the movie, and I want to create this myself. I do this myself. I do sewing, I do coding, I do programming, I'm soldering, I'm like, you know, now I'm in a nice kind of shirt, but I'm like building these things with my hands. And if a filmmaker comes up to me, it's like, oh, there's a lot of compromise. So for me, working with the film industry is sometimes a little bit an alpha fight, because I am doing really well if I can really take control over even if it's one design, if I can take control over that, for example. But often when I work with it, and a lot of the concept designers that are here in the room probably have the same, I have a lot of, like for me it's family. Every design that I create is family, is my baby, you know. So a lot of concept designers, they make concepts, and then probably what ends up is looking totally different. So they give the spark and the imagination in a way, you know. But for me, that's a little bit hard, because if I create something, I want it to be that, you know. And the film industry often, then so many layers go over it, and then it's all of a sudden pink or orange, and it's like, whoa, what's happening here? You know, I don't feel comfortable, and that's the moment that I would like say, like, if you're working in smaller productions or really doing your own thing, but really having the thing in mind, like whatever topic you have, empowering girls, or is that robotics, of the new notion of these interfaces, or a female superhero, like whatever that is, sort of, you know, if you can make that from start to finish in a way, then you really can get your own statements out of there. Or you really need to be friends with the film director to be really working and really have that mutual trust, like I do with Audi, for example. They know that I have freaky ideas, but they also understand me, that I'm going to create something that is blending my identity with their cars. Like, and if you see the Audi collection, you really see me and you really see Audi, you know. So I think it's a lot of mutual respect regarding to these things. And if you have really complicated designs, this is really complicated. There's like intelligence in there. There's design. There is sensors, and they're all working together. You know, that's how such a design grows. So yeah, so for somebody then to come in and to make cuts in that process is for me, like for example, pretty hard, sort of, you know. And the other thing is like, why, if I make for you a dress which got asked to me, which spits fire all around, you know, and in the end they put CGI over it, like I already know, like, yeah, you're gonna put CGI over it, why would I make this, you know, because things get transformed, and it really needs to be a statement, I guess, coming from the source in a way to really make this kind of design thrive, sort of. So I don't know because I don't know where you're coming from with your question, sort of, but that's a little bit my problem. But I have stepping into working with a filmmaker, because these ideas are pretty dear. They're not only concept, they can be built, and they are working, and they are sensing, and they can be more intelligent maybe than your current socialization with things around you, you know. So this is sometimes for me a little bit a question about, and also the interest is also fascination, also something that I like, but also like the disconnect between, again, pushing the button, or these things that really can do things, and then you have to work with things that might be a little bit more unexpected, for example, you know. But so regarding to design itself, sort of, like you are making, again, like you're making sort of analog design, or I guess, or you're doing filmmaking at this point.
Yes, I was actually in design for many years, but now I'm doing filmmaking. But in that world, I'm creating my own art direction and costume design and all
Yeah.
that. So I do have a background in design. So if I'm understanding you, I think you're telling me that it's possible for me to use my own artistic ability to go to some sites and create stuff on my own very easily. Or is it very complex to do, or what kind of machinery? You know what I mean? That's what I do.
Yeah, I think as a designer, or as a designer of any kind, or as a filmmaker, you're both doing the same. You're creating a narrative, right? Whether you do that with a dress, for example, also Alexander McQueen makes narratives. If you see his designs, it's not fashion. It's a whole story, you know. Such things. Also, a filmmaker is doing the same in a way, you know. If you like, depending on like what, if you say like, well, I want to have a certain kind of creation, sort of, you can of course start to build that yourself, or of course you can work with a team, or however you want that to do, sort of. It depends on you if you want to get the knowledge of like, how do I program, like I'm a tinkerer, I'm a builder, you know, or are you the one that is thinking of those ideas, and then like you're working that out. That's like any other production, I guess, if you're building a set, or if you're building a design, right? A set can also be, it can be analog, or it can be interactive in a way. But
Thank you. We'll take one last question here.
Hi, excellent presentation, definitely an eye-opener. I work in the field where I intersect investors, emerging tech startups and companies and corporations.
yeah.
What I'm seeing from an application perspective so far are all kind of marketing and maybe have not seen anything that solves a problem yet. It'll be great from an adoption perspective for this technology if you try to solve a problem. For example, in healthcare, if you look at what nurses have to carry during their shift in a hospital, they carry a lot of tools with them. Mm-hmm. And because of that, they're not really as efficient, they're not as effective in providing patient care. Do you see this kind of technology kind of helping out in that area?
Yeah, if you for example, very practical, if you want to play the practical game, sort of, I think like exoskeletons are there, like a lot of robotics who are helping people to walk, for example. That is interesting. There's a lot of like practicalities regarding to like again, like creating devices, for example. That's not necessarily what I'm off for. Like what I'm trying to solve is a little bit deeper. Like it's also about the mental model. It's about psychology and emotion. For example, like talking about design and emotions, if I get a lot of letters, for example, especially the spider dress, I get a lot of letters, for example, for, and it sounds a little bit weird, but like people who had problems, like especially girls who have been in a situation of, for example, rape, before, and they see the dress, and it gives them a moment to think of the notion of like having a device that might be able to protect them in a way that they cannot protect themselves, for example, I have a lot of people coming up to me that are blind, and that are because of the spider dress, for example. If they would have that on their body, they could create, because they're most of the people that can see, especially if they can see still a little bit, 5 to 10%, they have the notion of like people around them, and it really gives them really anxiety, So most of my designs are actually catered to something, and that's maybe non-practical and not necessarily existing in that notion in this world today, but they are on the notion of our emotions and our feelings and anxiety, sort of. So yes, I do understand that it doesn't have a more practical notion to it, but I'm searching for something else. I'm searching to a deeper connection that we can have with technology, sort of. I always say that technology came into our lives to help us, and now it's a token of stress. If I open my mobile phone, I get a heart attack. By why, sort of, So where can these technologies lead to us when it can listen to our body, And this is something that I'm trying to fight for. So it might not be the practical sense that you're talking about, but if our wearables and the new wave of the electronics that we might communicate and connect with, sort of, would be listening to our bodies, And I think there's a lot of, especially from the mental space, for example, what you can get out of there if you see it a little bit more adapted to that way, Also, again, if you look into a device situation, which I try to do with 18 Unicorn, with a little unicorn horn, making it playful, and I might be the instigator of these ideas, sort of, but I would love to see the devices that we have around us to be more like that, using fashion more as an interface, in where you can really have a dialogue with the things, and a much more deeper sense of connectivity with the sign around you, sort of. So. On the other hand, there are a lot of cool things regarding to wearables, and one that is really close to me is made by two friends of mine, Cute Circuit. It's the hug shirt or hug jacket. They came up with it like so many years ago, sort of. It's basically a shirt with like, it's really simple, and that was like also somewhere in 2000, right? It has like little, in the shirt it has little inflatable parts. And you can send a hug to the other person. Basically, for example, if you look at dementia, which is an interesting topic, the sense of touch, and giving a physical hug to somebody really from a psychological notion does a lot for example, an elderly person that has dementia. And this is then the notion of like you can send it through Bluetooth, you can send the hug, and there's now a lot of these ideas sort of, you know. But like the physicality of like sending a hug digitally, going from an analog thing to a digital one to an electronic thing again, you know, and if you are able to, for example, send such things or give such messages to another person in a really physical sense, which is embedded in your garment, I think, whoa, that's pretty fucking practical, sort of, you know. So this is like why I think yeah, especially wearables are just really, really interesting and really, really important, because they are the ones, this is the technology that can listen to our body in new ways, sort of, you know, and really taking us as a human in consideration.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was amazing, thank you. And I definitely want a smoke dress so I can hide up here when everyone comes in and hide behind a cloud of smoke. That was amazing. There's still plenty of inspiration to come from our next speaker, Ceres Regnum. So be sure to join us again in 15 minutes. We just need 15 minutes to set up some awesome props up here at the front, so there'll be lots of cool stuff to see. So we're going to refuel for a few moments. We'll be back on live stream shortly. For those on the stage, feel free to stretch your legs. If you wander over to the gallery on the north side, we have an alumni show in there by Miguel Ortega. It's The Art of the Ningo. It's well worth checking out. So we'll see you again in 15 minutes.